All federal loans have been paused for the last 3 years, which allow borrowers like our next guest to some temporary relief. Shanna Hayes is a graduate from Southern New Hampshire University and a former high school teacher, now living in D.C., working as a contractor. Shanna, it's good to see you. Thanks so much for taking the time to join us here. So you obviously will be impacted by the restarting here of student loan payments next month. Talk to us just about what exactly that means for you and how you're budgeting to prepare for this.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think as we think ahead of kind of what that looks like in terms of the end of the federal payment pause and payments restarting, as you mentioned earlier, I am currently an independent contractor after being part of the large tech sector layoffs that we recently saw, or continue to see, I should say. And so we find ourselves as a one income household yet again throughout the pandemic. And so likely what that means is obviously, I've enrolled in the new save plan in terms of kind of having the lowest payment possible for my wife and I. But thinking ahead, it really is going to be the difference potentially between having to take a job for the sake of taking a job versus finding a job that's truly in kind of my career field.
You're coming off of 3 years of no student loan payments. What has that pandemic pause meant for you? I mean, how have you been able to use some of that money that would have been put towards student loans to maybe potentially pay down credit cards?
Sure. I think just to clarify, I have been making student loan payments, just obviously not on my federal student loans. So I do have private loans. And so we've been paying those kind of all along throughout the payment pause. But to answer your direct question about kind of how we were able to use some of that money from not having to pay the federal student loans for the last few years, we were able to pay down our credit card debt, my wife and I. And again, it really helped us and kind of served as a life raft, the payment pause that is through the COVID-19 pandemic, as my wife lost her job in early 2020, like a lot of other, millions of Americans did. And so it kind of helped us get through those 8 months for her to find a new job. And then now kind of on the back end, we've switched roles a little bit here. And I'm actually the one that's now currently kind of on the hunt for my next full-time role.
So Shanna, knowing what you know now, you've owed $150,000 in student loans. Would you have done anything differently?
Oh, great question. Yeah, to be honest, I think I'm really excited to see students today thinking more about kind of what the end looks like versus kind of what their pay is just going to be, or kind of their degree field per se. I think as a first generation college student, my parents didn't know any better and I didn't know any better. And, you mentioned earlier that I was a high school math teacher right out of college. And, I got my first contract for $29,000 and thought it was like $1 million. And so without realizing kind of what that $29,000 equated to, which for most folks, they know today that not that much, and you can't actually kind of afford to live off that money, really kind of contributed to feeling a little bamboozled kind of by the system itself.
Shanna, as you look ahead to the potential resumption of these payments on federal loans, how are you thinking about your budget? We've heard so much about discretionary spending potentially getting pinched, consumers having to give up one thing because of the additional payments they have to make now. What are you thinking right now?
Yeah, my wife and I personally are kind of reconsidering our living scenario in terms of, our lease is up in February. And so we're already kind of talking about how do we downsize what we currently rent in terms of an apartment, because we do live in a very expensive, close to the city in states. And so what does that look like in terms of kind of how do we find a place that's slightly cheaper, but also kind of suits the needs that we have for kind of our various careers.
All right, Shanna Hayes, thanks so much for taking the time. We really appreciate it. Wishing you all the best.
Thank you.